All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining our webinar, Hidden Piano Gems, the music of Florence Price, Manuel Ponce, and more. I'm Brendan Fox, and I'm the Classical Publications Manager at Leonard. We're going to start with Dr. Desireé González-Miller, and she currently teaches at Utah Valley University and also has a private studio. And so excited to once again revisit these Latin American composers. All right, take it away, Desireé.
Hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today to celebrate the wonderful pedagogical music of Latin America. I'm Desireé González-Miller, and I'm the editor of Extending the Repertoire, Piano Music of Latin American Composers, Levels 1 and 2. I am originally from Monterrey, Mexico, and came to the US 17 years ago to pursue an education in piano performance. And this project was born out of a deep passion for expanding access to high quality, authentic music from Latin American classical composers, especially at these early levels of piano study. And I'm very excited to talk and show you these wonderful pieces. So let's dive into these books, and please stay until the end for the reveal of the premiere edition of Manuel Ponce's Prelude in C minor. So let's take a little bit of a look and see about this collection. I am incredibly grateful with how Leonard and their team, the composers' families and collaborators who helped me make this project a reality. My main goal with the creation of these books is to give Latin American classical music the rightful place it deserves in piano education. And my hope is that all of you teachers, students, and piano enthusiasts will embrace this repertoire not only as a novelty, but also to give it a permanent and essential part in your teaching. By doing so, we can ensure that future generations of pianists grow up with a more diverse and representative musical foundation. In terms of the featured composers, we're going to have the first volume with works by Eduardo Cáceres, a composer from Chile, Oscar Lorenzo Fernandez from Brazil, Blas Galindo from Mexico, Alfredo Nicolás Otero from Argentina, Manuel Ponce, and Mario Ruiz Armengol from Mexico, and a few works by myself as well. In this specific level, we see a little bit of a challenge because the beginner level back in the 19th century and the 20th century was a little bit different to what we expect now. So I was able to compose a few pieces there to bridge that gap. For quite a long time, beginner level piano students have had limited access to classical music written by these Latin American composers. And many existing collections just focus on popular songs or folk songs from these wonderful countries arranged for piano, but nothing really original that was written by classical composers. And this is the very first collection of its kind. So this is how we're bridging that gap and offering works that are specifically written for beginner piano students. There are also a few educational enhancements you'll notice in the books. Beyond the music, I wanted to provide a deeper educational experience, and each of the pieces includes cultural and historical context, pedagogical insights, and composer biographies, all designed to help students and teachers connect with the music at a more meaningful level. And additionally, this content is available in both English and Español, in Spanish, with some information published in English for the very first time. So those are my main goals, to be able to reach to a very wide spectrum of population and students and teachers, of course. Let's see. Let's talk about our pedagogical considerations. This book is going to have 14 pieces from 3 different centuries. They have a wide variety of styles, textures, and moods, and our goal is to provide a rich experience while also exposing students to the diversity of Latin American classical music. The pieces are going to be organized in progressive order. And for this beginner level, my goals were to keep the hand position as close as possible to the 5-finger pattern. Of course, we want to expand from there, but at this age, our students are going to be developing their proper hand position with a very strong in their hand. So that's going to be one of the goals, shaping 2 notes, 3 notes, and small phrases within 2 hands or 1 hand. And of course, as well, amplify the note reading range. Sometimes when we are studying with piano method books, the range is a little bit more limited. So with these books, we want to expand their reading. So let's take a look at some of these pieces. The very first one is La Piñata, and I wrote this piece. And we all know how piñatas as our fun party tradition in Mexico, but they have very deep historical roots. The Mayans and Aztecs had similar customs after the Spanish conquest, and piñatas became a tool for religious teaching. The star-shaped piñata symbolized the 7 deadly sins, and breaking it represented overcoming temptation with candy as the reward. In La Piñata, students will play an exciting arrangement of Dale, 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 which is the song we sing when someone is hitting the piñata in Mexico, capturing that anticipation and energy of this wonderful piñata tradition we have in Mexico with octaves, shifts, and jumps and key changes. So let's hear La Piñata. So that's La Piñata. The next piece we're going to be showing here is going to be Arroyo Cristalino de Mendoza. So the crystalline stream of Mendoza. And this piece transports us to the peaceful streams of Mendoza, Argentina. The flowing melody and smooth phrasing challenges students to refine their balance between the melody and the accompaniment, ensuring that their playing is as fluid and as serene as the gently moving stream. This piece was written by a living composer. Maestro Otero in Argentina wrote this piece. And I love using this piece with my students as they're starting to put both hands together and getting comfortable playing with both hands together. So let's hear Arroyo Cristalino de Mendoza. Such a wonderful piece. And as you can see in this slide, we worked very diligently and carefully to provide a well-designed pedagogical score where students are able to see the phrasing a little bit clearer. The size is appropriate for a beginner student. So these are all of our pedagogical goals, and who we're striving to cater to those needs of our beginner students. The next piece is going to be Danza de los Tecuanes. And we're going to play a little video so that you can see how this piece is inspired by a traditional dance from Guerrero, Mexico. This dance is going to be telling us about a tiger hunt. The right hand of the piece is going to be mimicking the melody of the reed flute, and the left hand is going to be keeping the steady drum beat on bass D. Through contrasting articulation and dynamic shifts, we're going to see how the students will experience the storytelling power of music and connect with these indigenous traditions of Mexico. So this is Danza de los Tecuanes. The next piece is going to be Gina. And Gina is a charming yet technically engaging piece. It's going to help students develop the expressive playing by focusing on the left hand voicing, articulation, and balance. And the middle section melody adds another layer of depth, making this a great study in both musicality and technical control. This piece is by another Mexican composer, Mario Ruiz Armengol, and he was known as Mr. Harmony. So you'll hear some of these beautiful harmonic shifts that even at a very early age, students can already start experiencing. So let's hear Gina. I love using this piece with my students, especially because of that contrary motion that they can also tackle from the very beginning. The next piece is going to be Despertar, Awakening. And this piece captures the fresh energy of a new day and is written in C major, combining rhythmic vitality and contrasting dynamics and articulations. And I love the interplay between the hands, both hands, and how they create a lively conversation. So let's hear Despertar. This is by the Brazilian composer Oscar Lourenço Fernandes. Wonderful. All righty. I think it's going to be time to take a look at book number 2, level 2. And our goals are the same, filling that gap in classical repertoire with the same educational enhancement, keeping that authenticity and notation in our scores, while also making them age appropriate for our wonderful students. Let's take a look at the pedagogical considerations for this level. Our intermediate level students will have different challenges, of course. And while having them in mind, these were some of my goals. Of course, including a wide variety of pieces from different styles and centuries, and tackle as many of those technical and musical challenges and considerations. So for example, using more 16th notes, that's going to be a challenge for the intermediate student, getting that tone very even and just feeling comfortable with playing them without any stops. Different rhythmic patterns with dotted rhythms and rests and a little bit more of a variety there. Introducing pedaling is going to be a little bit trickier now. And if we think of our intermediate students, they're also getting a little bit taller. So now they can reach the pedal, and it will be more comfortable for them to start doing this kind of repertoire. Preparing them for larger scale classical works, and motivating them to keep moving forward. Sometimes that momentum that they have when they start their lessons as a beginner student starts fading a little bit because things are getting a little harder. So those showstopper pieces will be included for festivals, competitions, and recitals, you name it. So let's take a look at these pieces. The first one is by Maestro Otero from Argentina. I love his pieces, and he is actually a living composer. This one is called Pampeana Argentina, and is based on the Pampean region, from the Quechua word Pampa, meaning plain. And it's going to be a vast, fertile lowland in South America, very famous area in Argentina. So I just love this piece because it's going to help us develop in the student the flexibility in the wrist by trying to reach those broken 7-chord melodic lines. I love using this piece for this reason, for the wrist flexibility. And it's so beautiful, has such a beautiful harmony as well. So let's listen to Pampeana Argentina. Such a beautiful piece, wonderful harmony there. The next piece is going to be Cinco más Cinco, 5 plus 5. And this piece is going to offer a wonderful introduction to Baroque concepts, such as imitation, a little bit of canon, and is going to allow our students to explore these musical motifs that appear in different voices and contrapuntal textures. This piece also incorporates a variety of articulations, legato, portato, staccato, and accents. And I chose to include this piece because of my own experience as a young pianist. When I was little, my teacher introduced me to scales through the Hanon book. Most of you are very familiar with Hanon. And while I learned all the scales as assigned, I now realize that I had to jump straight on to those 4-octave scales instead of doing 5-finger scales, 1-octave scales, to having a very well thought of development with my technique. And I thought we shouldn't be waiting all the way until the 2-part inventions or the little preludes and fugues by Bach to be introducing these Baroque elements to our students. So I think these kinds of pieces, and you probably saw that in Despertar, in the other book as well, are going to be so important in the preparation for the larger scale classical works. So Cinco más Cinco is going to serve as that perfect bridge, giving students an early and accessible entry into these fundamental Baroque techniques. Let's listen to Cinco más Cinco. Great. The next piece is going to be En el Jardín, and this is one of my favorites. Maybe I'm saying this one's one of my favorites, but really, they're all my favorites. And one of the main focuses in this piece is going to be the evenness of those 16th note passages, and helping the students that each of those notes are perfectly articulated with clarity and control, expressivity, flexibility. And I just love these beats so much. Again, by Mario Ruiz Armengol, his nickname, actually given by Duke Ellington, was Mr. Harmony. When you hear this piece again, you'll remember why he was called Mr. Harmony. Let's hear a little bit of En el Jardín, in the garden. Very good. Such a wonderful piece with those beautiful harmonies. I just love all of those modulations and colorful transitions. The next piece is going to be Prelude number 5 by Carlos Chavez. And he was a Mexican composer, very important figure in Mexico because he blended indigenous melodies from Aztec and Mayan traditions with Western forms, creating a very unique fusion of pre-Hispanic and modern aesthetics. So this Prelude number 5 is going to show us this approach built on a pentatonic foundation with those modal inflections that capture the essence of indigenous music. This piece also features that two-part counterpoint and imitation, reminiscing of Baroque techniques. We'll hear just a little bit of it so that you get a little bit of a taste. I love that modal sound, almost introductory to Debussy's kind of music. And the next piece is going to be Zapateado, which translates to shoe tapping or tap dancing, and is going to be describing the traditional Argentinian dances distinguished by the rhythmic tapping of shoes on the floor. And just as these super skilled dancers use different parts of their shoes to produce different sounds and effects, Luis Geneo employs a range of articulations, including legato, portato, staccato, staccatissimo, to evoke the rhythmic nuance of zapateado, of this tap dancing. I love using this piece for competitions. It's actually a little bit tricky for students, and they absolutely love it. Let's hear a little bit of zapateado. as you can already hear on the first page, lots of articulation. I love this piece, super great. Now we'll get into the Manuel Ponce pieces. And as some of you might know, my research has been very extensive on Manuel Ponce. That was my dissertation topic. And I was able to get permission from the National Autonomous University in Mexico, which is located in Mexico City, to visit the National Archives and get these manuscripts for the elaboration of this edition and for my dissertation too. These are just a few pictures of when I was doing research in Mexico City. Paolo Melo is the Mexican scholar who is in charge of this archive and was so generous to allow me to publish these pieces based on the manuscripts. Let's take a look at a couple more things here. This, for example, is one of Ponce's notebooks from when he was studying in Paris with Paul Duca. And he thought he was such a distinguished and personal pupil, one of his best students. You can see the next picture is going to be his studio right there with Paul Duca. Andres Segovia, the famous guitarist, is right there next to Ponce in the middle row. I'm not sure why Ponce is looking down, but he's right there. And Ponce, as you know, was a very important composer in Mexico. He was the father of Mexican nationalism, Romantic nationalism. And just like Bartok, he went into different villages and towns to collect songs from indigenous communities and from different tribes. You can see in these other pictures as well that he's collecting right there from the indigenous girls, their Mayan tunes. And I just think it's just so darling to have these records of him doing this labor of love to also preserve Mexican traditions and legacy. And the next picture is going to be him in towns right there with the mariachi band, super fun. Let's take a look at Preludio in C minor. This is the premiere edition of this piece. This piece was written around 1894. There's not an exact date, but because it says Ponce wrote it when he was 12, we get an estimate of when it was written. Never been published before, and we're so grateful that the UNAM very gracefully allowed us to publish this piece. So as you can see, we are taking into consideration all of these pedagogical elements we've talked about, the phrasing, the spacing for our students, and it's going to have a lot of influence by Chopin. We're just going to play a tiny little bit of it so you can get an idea of how this sounds, but it will give you those Chopin vibes. Let's take a look at Preludio in C minor. Lots of those Chopin textures with the nocturne left hand pattern, a little bit of of that raindrop prelude as well with the inner voices. Beautiful, beautiful piece. So this is our premiere edition, and the last piece is going to be intermezzo. And this is
Desiree, I'm so sorry. I think we have to wrap it up there. We're just going a
okay.
little bit over.
Perfect. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, no problem. So this is also based on a Nurtext edition. This is more of a well-known piece, also available in Expanding the Repertoire, piano music by Latin American composers. Thank you so much for joining this section, and we'll pass the time to Brendan.
Hi, and thanks so much, Desiree. But yeah, we're really excited about those books, and they're really, really great to get into. All right, so let's continue now with Dr. Michael Clark, who teaches at Baylor University and has worked on this Florence Price collection.
Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. And thank you so much for being here today. And thank you to Desiree for sharing such wonderful music by Latin American composers. It's always so energizing to me to discover beautiful music that I haven't heard before. And that's really what got me into Florence Price. I first heard about her in 2018, and she's now becoming much better known within our musical community. She was a remarkable American composer who was overlooked for decades due to her race and gender. So today I want to share with you Price's life story, as well as some of her music that's just been published in the new Rediscovered Gems collection from Hal Leonard. So let's go back to the beginning. Florence Beatrice Smith was born on April 9th, 1887 in Little Rock, Arkansas. This was in the decades after the Civil War, and Little Rock had developed a flourishing Black community with expanded educational access and improved economic standing. Florence was born into the Black upper class, and her family were leaders in the community. Her father was a dentist, and the family was active in Allison Presbyterian Church. But Florence was born at a turning point in history. The Reconstruction era had brought positive changes for Black Americans. Of course, the ending of slavery allowed freedom of movement for all citizens. The 14th and 15th Amendments granted Black men the right to vote, and Black Arkansans had growing political representation. 85 Black men served in the Arkansas legislature between 1868 and 1893. But the dawn of the Jim Crow era began reversing this progress. In 1891, the Tillman separate coach law divided seating on trains into white and colored sections. This was the first segregation law on the books in Arkansas. The right to vote was curbed by poll taxes and predatory limits on who could assist voters who couldn't read or write. And these vote suppression efforts devastated Black political representation. By 1894, Black Arkansans had lost all their seats in the state legislature. But despite these changes happening in society around her, Price received an excellent education. She began piano lessons with her mother quite young, performing in her first recital at just 4 years old. She studied piano and organ throughout her childhood and graduated from Capitol Hill High School at age 14. She was admitted to New England Conservatory, which of course was then and still is now one of the finest schools in the country. And she moved to Boston in 1903 to pursue a double major in organ performance and piano pedagogy. It was then that she also studied composition privately with the director of the conservatory. And after graduating from NEC in 1906, she began her teaching career, which included several years at Shorter College back in Little Rock, and then 2 years as head of the music department at Clark University in Atlanta, Georgia. She married attorney Thomas Price in 1912 and changed her name and moved with him back to Little Rock to start a family. It was around this time that Price began to focus more seriously on composition. In the 1920s, she started to enter her pieces in contests, resulting in her first publication, At the Cotton Gin, published by Schirmer in 1927. As an active piano teacher, she also composed many pieces for children. And I'd like to share with you 2 pieces she wrote in the late 1920s. This is the first piece in the book, Rediscovered Gems, and this is a performance by Farah Jade Lacey. Let's take a look. is a student based in New York City, not my student, but her teacher posted this video on Instagram and tagged me. And I said, I would love to share this with the world. I thought she did a beautiful job on her spring recital with that piece. And let's listen to another piece from around this time that's in the book. There's 3 pieces called Forest Scenes. And we don't know what kind of forest, but I can't help but thinking it's a magical forest. So this is the second movement of Forest Scenes. That piece always gives me a kind of mystical feeling listening to it. So the 1920s brought Price's first successes as a composer, as we learned, but this same period brought worsening conditions for Black citizens of Little Rock. Price was denied admission to Arkansas Music Teachers Association due to her race. And by the late 1920s, Little Rock was no longer safe for Florence and her family. Lynching and other acts of violence against Black Americans were more prominent than ever. So in 1928, Price decided to leave Little Rock for good. She and her 2 children fled to Chicago, joining the Great Migration northward as shown on this map. Her husband followed a few months later. But Chicago was familiar to Price. She had attended summer music lessons at Chicago Musical College in 1926 and 1927, and she soon found a community through Grace Presbyterian Church. The move to Chicago set the stage for a new era in Price's career. Chicago was a bustling metropolis and the second largest city in the nation at that time. And the new Negro movement was beginning to take off here as well. The height of the Black Chicago Renaissance ran from about 1935 to 1950, placing it a little bit after the Harlem Renaissance. But the musical seeds of this movement were planted about a decade before Price arrived in Chicago with the founding of the National Association of Negro Musicians. The NANM was founded with 4 main goals. Quote, to stimulate new music of racial origin and to create a new market for the same, to promote better economic conditions for Negro musicians, to promote Negro talent, and to stimulate social expression. So the fact that this had just been founded about a decade before Price arrived really set her up for success when she arrived. So she got there in 1928, and she immediately became involved in the NANM, as well as the Musicians Club of Women and the Chicago Club of Women Organists. This connected her with musicians who wanted to hear and perform her music. And the musical environment allowed her to flourish professionally. She continued to teach piano and write pieces for children, a few of which were published by Fisher, Presser, and Shermer. One piece that Price wrote at this time is the charming and elegant On the Top of a Tree, which was not published then, but is published now. So let's take a listen. I'm afraid somebody may have fallen out of a tree by the end of that piece. But to me, it's just the height of elegance and really shows off her artistry as a composer. So in the early 1930s, Price turned her attention to larger musical forms. In 1932, she won 2 first prizes in the Rodman Wanamaker competition for her piano sonata in E minor and her Symphony No. 1 in E minor. This prize heightened Price's profile within the National Association of Negro Musicians, as well as in white-dominated spaces of Chicago. Frederick Stock, the conductor of the Chicago Symphony at that time, was particularly interested in promoting American music, and he decided to give Price's symphony its world premiere at the Auditorium Theater on June 15, 1933, during the World's Fair. The concert also featured Margaret Bonds, Price's protege, as a soloist in a concerto, and that night, Bonds became the first Black instrumentalist to appear with the CSO. Acclaimed tenor Roland Hayes rounded out the program with selected arias and spirituals. This concert was a major success and a source of immense pride for the Black community. The editor-in-chief of the Associated Negro Press described its significance in this way. The occasion was the very last word in music achievement. For us, the last word is the first opportunity. It was the first opportunity for such a setting. It was successful absolutely on merit. And it is the beginning of a new era for us in the world of music. In the 1930s and 1940s, Price built on the successes of her first symphony and continued to hone her mature style, drawing on both African-American and European influences. The next piece I'll share is one of my favorites from this period. It's Rhapsody in E-flat. Let's take a listen. Price's compositional achievements came amid personal struggles. In the first few years of after her move to Chicago, Florence's husband Thomas grew violent, beating her and threatening to kill her. She filed for divorce in 1930 and was granted sole custody of their 2 daughters. She remarried soon after, more for financial stability than for love. By 1934, she no longer lived with her second husband, though they never divorced. Price and her daughters moved from apartment to apartment, at one point living with the family of Margaret Bonds. Though never destitute, she felt the pressures of financial insecurity, working hard composing and performing to provide for herself and her family. In the early 1950s, Price's music began to have an international reach. She was commissioned to compose an overture for the Hala Orchestra in Manchester, England, but she was unable to attend the premiere due to illness. In 1953, she planned another trip to Europe to accept an award in Paris, but her persistent heart troubles prevented her. She was admitted to the hospital on May 24th, 2 days before she was to leave, and died 10 days later on June 3rd, 1953. This next piece I'll share was one of Price's last, written in 1950. It's called Absence. So I'm keeping an eye on that clock. We'll probably skip the last video, but I do want to wrap up by just thinking about what has happened since Price's death in 1953. So only a fraction of Price's compositions were published during her lifetime, and her legacy was maintained basically through the diligent activism of musicologists like Barbara Garvey Jackson, who wrote the first article on Price in the 1970s, Helen Walker Hill, and of course, Ray Linda Brown, who wrote Price's only biography to date. But their scholarship was largely ignored in the classical music community. In 2009, though, a treasure trove of Price's manuscripts, long thought lost, were discovered in a former residence near Chicago. Hundreds of pieces were recovered, including every piece you've heard today and that's in the book. The manuscripts are now safely archived in the University of Arkansas, which is where I traveled several times to prepare this collection. So we're just finally beginning to understand Price's output as a composer. I won't go through all of this here, but multiple orchestral works, chamber music, 100 art songs, and of course, over 200 works for piano and organ. And, breaking down those pieces, she has pieces kind of in a romantic style, like waltzes, preludes, songs without words, many, many pieces with descriptive titles, as well as collections of dances. And then Ray Linda Brown coined this term Afro-romantic for her style when it combines elements of African-American vernacular styles and romantic music. So I just want to conclude by sharing this quote. Well, I should tell you about the book, right? You know about this book. It's Rediscovered Gems, and it's got 20 never before published pieces, or intermediate to early advanced, and it's all based on the manuscripts recovered in 2009. And so I'll conclude with this quote from Price. Having been born in the South and having spent most of my childhood there, I believe I can truthfully say that I understand the real Negro music. In some of my work, I make use of that idiom undiluted. Again, at other times, it merely flavors my themes. And at still other times, thoughts come in the garb of the other side of my mixed racial background. I have tried, for practical purposes, to cultivate and preserve a facility of expression in both idioms, although I have an unwavering and compelling faith that a national music, very beautiful and very American, can come from the melting pot, just as the nation itself has done. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll turn it back over to Brendan.
Thanks so much, Michael. Really fascinating stuff, and that's a great quote to end on, too. All right, so now we have a little time for Q&A, and I don't see any questions submitted, but, you guys can ask questions live if you want, and draw upon the knowledge of these two amazing presenters. I guess I could also ask, what are your favorite pieces from these collections? Each of you, if you had to pick one that just is the absolute highlight.
You first, Desiree.
Okay. I think from the second book, from the Latin American books, I will say I really like En el Jardín. And the Ponce pieces are really, really beautiful. And I actually have Michael's book right there too. And it's so hard to pick one, but I really like Up Home, and our kids like it a lot too. So I hope you guys also get to take a look at Up Home. We love that one.
Yeah, I think for me, it goes back and forth. Of course, it's like choosing between children. But that Rhapsody in E flat that I shared, that's actually a piece that was in a very rough draft form. Many of Price's manuscripts are very clean, easy to read, ready to publish. But that one, at least all that survived, was what seemed like a pretty rough sketch. So I had to work harder than on any other piece to like, what's the note? I've just, and it's just such a gorgeous piece that I really feel so grateful that I was able to get it out, into the world.
Nice. I have a question here. When will more of Price's music become available? And I can sort of answer. This is a little bit of a tricky topic. Kind of comes down to some complicated rights issues with some of the rights holders. Michael, I don't know if you want to mention something too, just from your own experience. But
so the pieces in this book, because they were not published during Price's lifetime, they entered the public domain 70 years after her death. So that explains these pieces. And so I'm hopeful, I'm ready, at a moment's notice to get some more pieces published. So we'll see what we can do.
And I see this question: are the pieces arranged or originally written for piano? I think both.
So the Prices are all originally for piano.
Yeah.
Yes. For the Latin American books, all of them are original. The Piñata song is a popular song in Mexico. So I did my own adaptation of that for children because they love hitting the piñata. So that's the only one that it would be considered maybe an arrangement.
Are there easier pieces by Florence Price?
There are, I would say the Sailing Through Clouds is the easiest piece in this book. So there are easier still pieces. They're not yet available from Hal Leonard. Maybe they will one day. There are a collection by a publisher called Clarinon, that's Clara Schumann and Nannerl Mozart. They have a collection, I think published maybe almost approaching 10 years ago, 2016 or 17. It's called Teaching Pieces of Florence Price. And those will be her very, very easiest pieces.
Yeah. I guess what's something really interesting and revelatory that each of you learned while working on these projects with all your research and compilation? Desiree first, I guess.
Yeah. I think that there's so much to do still, and that this is probably only the beginning, hopefully. I think we learned a lot with what you said, Brendan, licensing and copyright issues, and what's available and what's um, possible as well. And for Latin American music, this is a huge deal because everything exists as a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. So I've had multiple colleagues reaching out. I would love a list of Latin American pieces that my students can play in competitions. We're tired of hearing the same, old repertoire, and um, for competitions, you have to submit an original copy of the music. So now with these collections, it's more of a reality and a possibility to include this repertoire in competitions and festivals in a more formal way. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity we've had here with Leonard to pursue for years. The realization of these projects with licensing, appropriate licensing and copyrights.
So cool. I think one thing I learned was just how elegant of a composer Florence Price was. I keep coming back to that word because that's the best one I can think of. Both in her handwriting is beautifully elegant, but the way that she voice leads and just handles these melodies, I just was, I've always enjoyed hearing her music, but being able to kind of get under the hood a little bit and see just how much of a craftswoman she was, that was very impressive to me.
We're going a little over time. I see one more question here about, are there any duets or concertos you came across either for Latin American or Black composer or Price and others? We know Price wrote a concerto, and I know that some of the composers in Desiree's collections wrote concertos, but if you want to briefly just say a little something.
Yes, there's a lot more music to be published and to be discovered. And I think the duets, I didn't see very many duets for elementary aged students or levels, but definitely into the early advanced repertoire. And of course, concerti, so many of them, are going to be in the advanced level. But yes, so much music to be published and discovered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and same for Price. She does have a few piano duets and some duo piano things, some of which are available, I think, from that Clarinon editors or publisher.
All right. Well, thanks again both so much. This is really enlightening and just full of wonderful music. And I think the overall theme here is just we're uncovering some music that has suffered from a lack of availability. And that's why this is Hidden Piano Gems. And now we're sending them out into the world for people to enjoy. And I hope that everyone here had a good time. All right. Thanks again so much, Michael, Desiree, and everyone else. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.